Bit of an early one, this one. Welcome back to an all new episode of the All Immigrant Podcast. I'm your host, Avin. I am once again joined by my co host, Vivek. Vivek, hello.
Hello.
Say hi to the people. And
Good
Vivek, we have
morning,
a
Abin.
new good morning. Good morning indeed. We have a new guest on, Vivek, and this is someone you and I both know quite well. So, could you please do the honors?
I can, absolutely. I'm very pleased to introduce Sudarshan Suresh. Sudarshan is a talented international accountant with a curious passion and spirit to explore the world and serve people around him as he does. I met Sudarshan over a year ago for the first time, and his uncontained, unrestricted spirit was shining bright then, and I can see that it is right now. A chartered accountant from India and a CPA from Australia, Sudarshan has lived across continents and currently plays multiple roles wearing numerous hats and is working on a mission to empower people around him in everything he does. Sudarshan is an internal audit manager at Westpac in Sydney and is the founder and coach at Transform to Thrive, a coaching institute to help young immigrants thrive in Australia. In addition to his professional success, Sudarshan is also a non executive director at Initiatives of Change, a not for profit that focuses on trust building, ethical leadership, and sustainable living. I have it on good memory that Sudarshan is an excellent table tennis player, although I think this is the one thing I might be slightly better than him at. But that being said, welcome to the podcast, Sudarshan.
What have we started?
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Vivek. Great to be here. Great to see you guys again. And yeah, very excited to be here today. Have to say, I love what you guys are doing. And there's so much value in sharing stories of people who've moved continents. And there's so much scope to inspire people as well as get new perspectives and just hear their stories. So yeah,
Awesome.
thrilled to
We're
be here.
thrilled to have you. I think let's start from right from the very beginning. There's so many questions we have, and there's so much of a beautiful story, you have in your life to tell us. I think the first question is, obviously you're a chartered accountant from India. I personally know how hard and grueling that exam is. You finished your chartered accountancy and then you pivoted to working in operations for a travel company right after you qualified. So maybe talk us through that pivot and that first shift in your life.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. And I actually remember you were one of the benchmarks for me when I was doing my CA final exam because I remember you had passed just in the previous attempt when the pass rate was like 3% or something. It was a bit of a legendary tale at the time, but well, yeah. So I grew up in a family of chartered accountants, somewhat similar to you, Vivek. My dad is a CA, runs his own audit firm, and I guess I grew up in Bangalore and I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. So I just kind of got shepherded into this line without too much volition. And I guess after I finished my second stage, the IPCC, I started to really struggle with it because it's a challenging exam. I'm not a very tall guy, but at one point I stacked up all the books and it was taller than me. And I had to memorize all of that, right? So I was really struggling to find the motivation to go through with that course. And that was when I actually started traveling, just on weekend getaways, meeting new people, having a few adventures, and really fell in love with that. That's what kind of kept me going month on month to come back to the books, come back to tuition classes, and manage work while I was at it. So that was around when I kind of made a deal with my dad. So I said, all right, you want me to complete this course? I don't want to, but here's what we can do. I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to complete this course. I'm going to finish my final exam. And after that, I can do whatever I want with the rest of my life. And he was happy with that. So that was my motivation to get done with it as soon as I could, which led me to studying for like going into a cave for 4 months and studying for 10 hours straight every day and cracking that final exam. And the day I finished my articleship, I put down my resignation letter and signed another offer letter from
Wow,
Nomads.
that's amazing. So you essentially you just followed your passion, basically. That's all it was.
Yeah, I guess at that point in time I was 22 and I was really keen to like have new adventures, meet new people, and the whole follow your bliss and do what you're passionate about was very rife at the time. So I guess yeah, I was quite inspired by that.
I
Also, I
got it.
mean, the entire experience can be quite a soul sucking one, right? Because a lot, because generally the things, I mean, at least from what I know of the Indian CA exam, is that there's a set number of applicants that they rather of CAs they accept every year, and sometimes even if you've had a great paper, you may not qualify just because they've met that quota. So just to piggyback off Vivek's question, how does one keep yourself motivated through that period? Because you don't know the outcome. This is one of those strange outcomes where people have gotten their marks cards, and in spite of them having written like the correct answers, the pages have just been slashed. So how does one keep your mind and your wits about it? I think it's a question for the both of you, really.
I mean, so I never went through the adversity in the chartered accountancy exam for me to know how I would take it. If the outcome had gone the other way for me, I this may have been a lot more interesting question for me to answer because I'd had personal experience tied to it. It's very easy to say, oh, I would have been okay, but I know I wouldn't have been okay because I gave it my all, and I'm sure most students give it their all. So um, I think it's kind of like, in a way, it's kind of karmic, right? And if you think about it, it gives you it's a philosophy that you do your best, but beyond the point, you don't control the outcome. And I think CA is just a very wholesome embodiment of that, because it's in your face that, hey, you can do your best, but you literally can't do anything about it. So that's I mean, that's the philosophy behind it. But as a 22-year-old, I don't expect myself to have understood that. So I believe it have been soul crushing to have gone through that experience.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Um, I know a lot of my friends who went through multiple failures, and it takes so much motivation and grit to stay with it and just sign up to write it again, because you never know what the outcome
Yeah.
is going to be. For me, it was luckily I was lucky enough to clear it in my first attempt. But I guess what it was still really challenging, and I guess what helped me were two things really. One was knowing my why, like why do I want to get done with this at the earliest, and probably making my motivation much stronger than my fear of the exam or the adversity. And my why was I wanted to travel. I wanted to start a new phase of my life, and I wanted to meet new people. I want to go on adventures. I want to explore India and the world. And that was what was waiting for me on the other side of that exam. So that was what was driving me. The second thing I did was this really cool hack, I guess, where I wrote a letter to myself from the future. So I actually addressed it back to myself, almost like that version of reality where I have cleared the exam and I'm living my best life, and I addressed it back to the version of myself who was struggling with this mountain load of books, and just kind of egg myself on, encourage myself to kind of remind myself of what was on the other side. And every time I lost my motivation or felt really overwhelmed, I would come back to that letter and pick it up.
And actually, and the satisfaction of having to watch that reality come true is probably unparalleled, because you're just like, damn, you've
Yeah.
literally written this into existence, which is amazing. Now, after having gone through all of this, after having spent some time with nomads, you made the decision to move to Australia. Like, could you just take us through what happened and kind of what led to that decision?
Yeah, sure. So I was working with
Mm.
Nirvana Nomads. It's a adventure travel startup based out of Bangalore, and so every weekend I would take people on trips. And I guess one of the perks of clearing my CA was I got to negotiate a 1 month solo trip in Europe. Um, and I sold my car, took my savings, and I just took off. And I loved it. I loved traveling by myself and exploring new places. And that's when I realized um, I'm not done with studying. I'm a bit of a nerd, I suppose. So I wanted to study more. I didn't quite know what, but I also knew I wanted to study abroad because I knew there was so much to explore in the world. And I knew that there were so many new experiences I wanted to have, which could only be had outside of India. I guess at a deeper level, I was also yearning to explore more of myself in a new context and see how that would shape me along the way. So I was working with nomads, and we would take people on trips, come back, and I was in charge of writing the stories of what happened on those trips. Those cool encounters where strangers became friends over a weekend and some of them got
Wow.
married, or some of them like started new business partnerships. Some of them were housemates. So I was in charge of writing these stories, and I really fell in love with writing. The guys at Nomads were quite open as well and handed that over to me. So I would write the weekly newsletters and all the social media content. I really fell in love with writing. It felt like I was really connecting with myself when I wrote. So I wanted to study writing. Again, following the thread of following your passion. I guess that's what kind of made me decide I wanted to study writing. And then I looked up courses. My options were either the US or Australia. And I came across this one course from the University of Melbourne called a Master's in Creative Writing, Publishing, and Editing. And that just had me. So that was exactly what I wanted to do. So I literally didn't even apply anywhere else. So I applied for that, got rejected, applied again. They said, "Look, you've done commerce and you're applying to do a master's in creative writing. There's no link, right? So you need to do like something in between." So they suggested I do like a grad cert in creative writing, which I did, and then finally got accepted into the masters in Melbourne. So that's what brought me to Australia.
Mhm.
I arrived in like a cold, very bleak winter in July. It was horrible. Like I wasn't used to that kind
Mm.
of a environment, but that's a whole different story. But yeah, that's essentially what got me to
Wow.
Australia.
I keep forgetting that July is winter in Australia. I mean, I heard July and I'm like, oh man, that's beautiful
Right?
summer weather. No. I know.
Everything is opposite and reverse down
It's
here.
like I had the exact opposite experience as you. I arrived in the US in August, and I arrived on the hottest day of the year.
Ooh.
So, and I was hopelessly lost. I had no idea of where I was and where I was going. I was supposed to get to university, and I left the house at 10 a.m. in the morning, and I got to university at 1 p.m. And it's a 15-minute journey, regardless of where you are. I was just running in circles in the summer heat, and I absolutely hated that day.
Oh
I'll never
man,
forget. Like you always remember your first day, right? You just remember the elements.
that's
You
right.
remember
Yeah.
like everything about it. I'd like I'd dressed formally and gone to college, and then I walk in and everyone's in shorts and shirts. I was like, wow.
Oh my god. I had the cold experience as well when I landed in the US for the first time. It was February, uh, and I remember Louisville had its first like like Louisville has like three snowfalls in the year or something. It had like it's so rare. It had its second snowfall the day I landed. I was like, oh, are you kidding me? And I had a I was lucky I had a colleague pick me up, but it was I remembered it took me so long to get used to that cold. And I live in
Yeah.
Chicago now, and I don't think it's got colder, and I'm still not used to it. So I think cold is just something that yeah, you just feel it all over your body. But yeah, so you spoke about why you moved to Australia. So I think that the next thing we probably want to ask you is talk us through your initial days in Australia, right? So it's a new way of life, different culture, completely different continent. Everything is different there, right? So how did you find how was your adjustment to the new way of life? And fast forwarding a few years, just for this question, how did marriage change your way of life for you?
Yes, I was here in Australia for about 7 years before I got married, which was fairly recent. So I had I had plenty of time to like adjust and navigate life here by myself. So I'll maybe dive into that first. I guess initially it was quite difficult, for like nearly a whole year and a half, because well, I'm a pretty ambiverted guy. I can speak to new people and start up new conversations and make friendships. But it was almost as if I completely forgot how to do that once I landed here. I don't know if any of you guys have had that experience, but well, for starters,
100%.
yeah. Oh
Yeah,
wow,
yeah,
okay. I'm glad
yeah.
it's not just me.
No.
It's not
Because
you.
it's this
Yeah.
completely new culture, and I don't know exactly how I fit. We don't have any shared context with people here. I don't have any family or community here. And I guess I was also going through this internal process of rediscovering my identity in this new context. Like, who am I if I'm not the guy who lives on this road in Bangalore, who drives this car, who works in this job? Every aspect of my identity is kind of stripped away, and I'm trying to rediscover who that is, who I am, and where I fit in, where I belong, and what I'm doing here. So that was a very kind of debilitating time, I would say, nearly for a whole year and a half. I was also adjusting to the new culture here, the way people talk. Like there's this really cool thing in Australia called the tall poppy syndrome. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's basically when well, Australians are pretty down to earth, right? And at the moment someone starts to even like speak a little highly of themselves, right? The entire group just rallies and tears that person back to ground. It's so I remember I was I just climbed Mount Kilimanjaro and I came here and I was staying at this Airbnb and I told my host I'd done that. He just looked at me, smirked, and walked away.
Oh my god.
um, anyway, and there were so many tiny little instances like that, which was like an adjustment period for me to understand the lay of the land, the rules over here, the social protocols and the customs, which made it very difficult for me to make conversation beyond the surface level. And I guess I really craved that at some level. So it did have an impact on my mental health, and I do remember feeling quite like isolated and lonely around that time. So yeah, it was quite challenging at the start. To add to that, I was doing this master's degree in creative writing, and my entire cohort were mostly single Australian women who were probably single moms in their mid 40s or 50s. So not really the kind I would go out and get a drink with after that, after class. So there weren't too many opportunities for me to kind of make meaningful relationships and have meaningful conversations. So that was something that I think really kind of got to me.
Yeah, I think that's a very pervasive challenge for immigrants, right? Because and in my case, I remember when I moved. It's I didn't move to a big city, right? I moved to Louisville, Kentucky, which was not a very big city, uh, and just like you, I didn't have many opportunities to go out there and meet people because it was primarily I was spending all my hours of the day in the office, and didn't have I had a few colleagues who became friends with, but again I was craving. They were all a little older, different stage of life. They were all married. They all had kids. It was a little different from where I was at that point. And I was always looking for something more, and I couldn't. I had so much trouble finding it. And I'm actually an extroverted person by nature, but I think what that taught me, and then COVID that followed, right? COVID happened a year after I moved. What all that taught me was how to be comfortable with being with myself and drawing energy from myself. So I think that
Mm,
I kind of put a positive twist on it. I made it work for me, but I totally saw and felt what you went through, and I think this is a common immigrant problem where we just don't know how to find that belonging when we first move here, and everything is so different, right? So you're just like like in my case, I didn't know about American football. I didn't know the rules of it. I didn't know anything about baseball. I still don't know anything about baseball. But it's like you're just like trying to have conversations with people, and it's almost like they're speaking a language that you don't understand. So you're trying to reconcile and bring in whatever you think you have, all your world of experience and wisdom, and it's not always going to be enough. So I think just learning to accept that for me was an interesting challenge.
Yeah, like most definitely. I think even when I had moved and I again I consider myself to be quite ambivert. I was second guessing myself in conversations, and you tend to just like there's that sense of familiarity that you've built with your peers is gone, because I could
yeah,
walk into a room in Bangalore or wherever in the country and have a conversation with just about anybody. But now you have to kind of gauge perspective. You need to gauge, because not everybody is as free and as open as probably say you are, or at least from the kind of people that we've been around for so long. And that kind of knocks you back a little. And I lived in a big city, and big cities can get terrifically lonely. It's uh, it's it's not the best scenario sometimes, especially when there are so many people around, but you just don't have anyone to talk to, so it can be a very isolating experience. And jumping back onto what Vivek said, is it really forced me to spend time with myself and to be comfortable with spending time with myself. And up until that point, that was something I hadn't done quite very often. It was always like, oh, if I'm bored, let me head out, let me go do this, let me go meet some friends. I think moving, and then when you're confronted with that reality, and COVID happened, you're like, okay, this is the scenario. I think it's time we sat in and looked inward, and ultimately that helped. I think all of us can look back now to the time we moved, and can safely say we are very different people compared to the ones who just got off that plane all those years ago, right? So
yeah,
I fully echo your points, boys. So how has
yeah.
marriage
I
changed that for you, though?
Hmm. That's a really good, interesting question. All right, so let's look at it from the perspective of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like we always have this need for connection and belonging, When
Yeah.
we first move here, like we're really like craving for that need to be met. So we go out and like talk to people, find that need fulfilled in different ways. I guess for me, marriage has like been a very beautiful, settling experience of sorts, where I have like my best friend with me all the time. So I'm not really looking outside home for that need to be fulfilled. And I guess what that does is it opens up more creative energy for me. It's opened up like a feeling of contentment in certain areas of my life, which allows me to take on new challenges elsewhere and to push myself and explore new avenues and new ideas and new opportunities in the outside world. So that's been really good. So I can't, yeah, I feel like that sense of loneliness is gone. But I
Good.
also want to say that like that inward orientation that comes almost hand in hand with the experience of migrating is actually really valuable because I would credit that to developing a deeper sense of self-awareness or emotional intelligence, even understanding your own values, and why those are important for you and why they make you who you are, because that also kind of for me informed the person I chose to marry. Because if I have more clarity on who I am as a person and what my values are, it makes it much easier to find someone else with similar values rather than looking at other, probably more superficial factors. So I would definitely, I'm looking back, I'm grateful for the journey, as challenging as it's been. And I think it's definitely carved a new depth and made me a different person.
I think I echo the same. I echo that. In hindsight, is always 2020. When you were going through it, it was hard. But I think looking back, I genuinely believe making that decision to move here, which was a clutch moment in my life, making that decision to move here was probably the best decision I could have made for myself and for my life. So I think things have a funny way of working out. In the end, you just
Yeah.
it's frustrating in the middle, and you want to pull your head out. I think the middle is the hardest, right? Because the early part is you're full with excitement. You have the
Yeah.
innocence, you have anticipation.
Yeah.
In the future, you're like, oh yeah, that I could see how that fit in. But in the middle, you're just like, what's happening?
And the worst part is you don't know you're in the middle,
Yeah.
Yeah,
so you just kind of kind of caught in it. Yeah.
yeah.
So, to continue on, you worked with a travel company in Australia for some time, and then you decide to pivot back into audit, and you got your CPA as well. Uh, what happened? Like, what was the reasoning behind that shift?
So I graduated from my master's in creative writing in December 2018, but never really felt like I wanted to turn that into my profession. It was something I was
Mm,
always passionate about. So I kept looking for other things to do. I was lucky enough to land a travel role here where I was basically helping people travel to India, which was awesome. And I did that
mm,
during my master's and through it. Um, and for nearly a year after I graduated, I was trying to find a job in my field here, and I couldn't. It was so difficult because I don't know what it's like in the US, but here in Australia, unless you have local relevant work experience, it's very difficult to get hired. And your visa status plays a big role in that as well. I know you guys know what I mean.
You're
So
preaching to the
I,
choir.
I, I kept hitting that catch 22 situation
Yeah.
over and over again in every interview, in every application, hundreds of rejections. And yeah, and I guess so. Luckily, I still had my part-time travel job, which kind of kept me going financially, and that went on up to March 2020. And you boys remember what happened in March
yeah, yeah,
2020?
of course, yes. Mm,
COVID hit, the international border closures, no flights operating, the travel industry comes to a standstill. The Australian government has this thing called the job seeker where they incentivize business owners to keep staff on board, but that's only if you're a permanent resident. I'm a temporary resident, so my boss, who was a great guy, had no choice but to let me go. So March 15, 2020, I'm jobless, very nearly broke, and just before that, for Jan and Feb, I had built up such amazing momentum. I cleared my CPA. I knew that was probably going to be my easiest part of entry back into the workforce, in something that's related to what I want to do in the long term. So I'd been applying for roles. I was really building a good sense of momentum in through Feb, And then there were hiring freezes as well. No one's hiring. I'm broke, and there's no like opportunity to get hired. So yeah, it was a pretty dark time at that point. Yeah, quite depressing actually. And I guess that was also when I'd started volunteering with initiatives of change within their strategy committee, just doing time on my weekends and contributing in whatever way I could. Um, and that's when I really felt the impact of building your social capital when you're in a new place come into play, because I developed this really strong relationship with one of the directors there. And I told her, look, I have 6 grand in my bank account. I can make it work here for another 3 months. After that, I'm going to have to go. I would love to work on a short term basis with initiatives of change. And she had worked close enough with me, and I'd put in the work for us to have a really good relationship. So she actually took that to the board, created a new role for me, and came back to me with a job offer which was exactly tailored for me. A short-term project to like engage the entire membership base of the organization here, help them digitally transform through COVID because everything was now virtual. So I became like a 3-month project manager to like schedule a series of events which brought the entire community together and kind of express new ideas. We had a new strategy that was implemented at that time, so to get their buy-in as well. And that really the I was kind of taken back to my festing days in college because I could come up with the name of the event and like be the creative brain behind it in a sense. And that received an incredible response. What it also did for me personally was it bolstered my confidence to feel like I'm meaningfully contributing somewhere, even though I have nothing with me right now. That really boosted my confidence, and that's when I got an interview from PwC to apply for the senior associate role. And I went into that interview with this confidence of having been killing it in one other area of life, and that's what kind of got me through that interview as well. So that's how I made my way back into audit.
Wow. It's amazing, right? Because you were probably arguably at your lowest low at this point. This was the hardest moment, and you had an option to be strong with your back against the wall and find a way to make it work, or go back. And
Yeah,
which probably would have seemed like an easier option, and I'm sure it went through your head multiple times in that moment, right? And
yeah.
you found the strength to do it. And that's, I mean, I think that's really something, right? I think when you look back at that moment, at that, like we talked about clutch moments, when you look back at that clutch moment in your life, do you ever feel like it could have gone the other way? And do you ever think about what life would have been if it had?
I was actually applying to roles in India at the time, so it was a very real possibility. I had to consider every avenue. I had only 6K in my account, right? I can't make it work for more than 2 or 3 months. So
Yeah.
I had to think about that. And I didn't want to because to some extent it felt like I would be failing myself because I knew I'd come all this way not just to turn back and go home when the going got tough. It was a real test. I had a bunch of other things happen at the time. A relationship ended. I crashed my car. It was just a lot of
Mm.
things going on at the time. So it was a real, I would say, one of those spiritual tests, which really tests your character and asks you who you are when you're facing that mirror, and you got to find deeper reserves of strength within yourself to come back and say, I'm not going to give up today.
Oh, amazing. Oh,
That's
okay.
yeah, we've all been there at some point where it's just adversity on top of adversity, and just you think, oh, that's enough adversity for today. There's an additional dollar that comes
Yeah,
right on.
yeah,
Yeah, we've all been
yeah,
there, and I think we're all wizened and tired by it at this point. But
yeah.
I mean, it's always great that you can stand up to it, and and when you see through the relief and also the how do I put this? The whole idea of just having gotten past it is is extremely fulfilling. And when you look back and you're like, wow. And like as Vivek mentioned, hindsight is 2020. And when you look back, things often seem a lot smaller than they actually are. But when you're in that moment, you're like, this is hell. This is absolute hell.
Yeah.
But getting through it makes it all the more sweeter.
Yeah. And
Yeah, I guess sorry, go on, Vivek.
no, no, go on, go on, go on.
Mm.
No, that's it. Go on.
No, I was so I was just saying, I think the real insight was in something Sue said. He said that when things were really bad, and he was obviously going through the struggles, but then he found this one breakthrough, and then he used that momentum to build and get into PwC and do all these amazing things thereon. So for me, I think the biggest takeaway when I look at, every time I find myself in a moment of adversity where I feel like things are just dogpiling, and because that's how life works, right? And you have
Yeah,
one thing going wrong, suddenly all of a sudden you have three things going wrong. and
yeah.
and the way that I've found to overcome that is to look for a quick and easy win somewhere in your life, because I feel like the second you do that, you're kind of turning the tide a little bit. Even though things are going wrong, you have something to build off of, and you can transform that, use that momentum to really build something, and reverse the direction of what's happening in your life at that point. And I think you said that it was part of your story. It was very subtle, but I think that's what happened. You found your first win, and then you just kind of built on that, and then you became unstoppable.
That's absolutely spot on. And that's actually one of the principles that I use now when I coach people of harnessing that momentum from small wins to build momentum and then attack your bigger goal. So yeah, remind me to come back to that later.
I use the same
Okay.
principle when I coach, so
Oh,
it's
yeah,
awesome. I
nice.
love it.
You
Yeah,
know what? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it's
awesome.
amazing. Okay, awesome. So just I want to just spend a little bit of time on PwC. So you obviously were with PwC, I think, in India and in Australia. So I mean, same company, and I know you were doing something similar, I believe, audit. Um, but I'm sure there were differences between the two in terms of the culture, the work ethic, the people in general. Maybe talk us through the differences in experiences you had within the same multinational company in two different countries, continents.
Yeah, that's a great question. I was a senior associate for some time in PwC India, and when I joined here, I was also a senior associate. But I guess firstly, a senior associate in Australia was one grade higher than a senior associate in India because we had an offshore team doing all the like the testing and the vouching, whereas in India, for a large part of my time there, I was doing the basic like the where the rubber meets the road, you're doing the testing and the vouching. Here, I got more involved with the strategy aspects of it. But I guess from a cultural perspective, it was a whole world apart. Firstly, I noticed that here in Australia, there were hierarchies, but they were a lot less rigid or fluid. For example, we wouldn't address the partner as sir. We would call them by their first name, which you guys probably also notice in the US, right? Uh, that said, that didn't mean there weren't hierarchies. There definitely were. It's just a lot more subtle. The other aspect to it is it's a fiercely competitive environment, probably more so in Sydney than it was in India. The good part was I felt like there was less politics and the office gossip, or at least I didn't really get involved with it, so I don't know how much there was. Um, but yeah, it felt like a more positive environment in some ways. That said, it was still extremely demanding and it really pushes you to the brink, So that was all. You never just get out of a challenge and then life is all good and it's happily ever after. It's always from one to the next. And this was around the time when I was hoping for my visa to be renewed. So I had that driving my motivation to work 12, 15 hours a day and eventually ended up burning out at some point. So um, I guess you have an advantage in your home country where you're not fighting for your survival rights, and that can really impact you in certain ways. It can make you neglect your own health and well-being and put all your efforts into one certain direction, and in the long run, that's not sustainable, and it's going to make you burn out. That's what happened to me at PwC in Australia. But I think from a cultural perspective, it's way different from PwC in India.
And how much of that did that play in setting up this new business that you've got going, centered around personal coaching, specifically for careers for immigrants? Was there something that happened in those PwC years where you felt, oh, okay, I could, this is something I could and I should be doing?
It was actually much later once I joined Westpac. The biggest difference was there's much better work-life balance right now. That means I have
Mhm.
capacity and time to think. And like I said, I got married after I joined Westpac, so that again settled my need for companionship and allowed me to engage in other creative pursuits. So it happened a little later, but I guess a lot of my experiences at PwC have shaped my approach because I primarily work with people within financial services and banking. So I know exactly the nature of challenges they're going through. So I know how to kind of coach them or help them navigate around that.
No, I was like, no, I was just hearing this. I mean, I have a lot of questions, but let me just start with one. I think so. I mean, you got into coaching, and of course, coaching is it's in itself a whole new set of skills. And it's. I mean, it takes time to get into your rhythm. Um, I think one of the things that I've found about coaching, when I coach, I don't do it as much anymore, but when I used to do a lot more, was that there were many instances where I found that I couldn't solve my clients' problems. There were instances where it maybe coaching wasn't the answer, maybe it was therapy, maybe it was something else, right? And in coaching and therapy, obviously not the same thing. So I guess the question is, did you come across clients in your in your time where they had challenges which you felt you couldn't coach, and how did you deal with that? And talk us through your process of how you came to resolutions in those moments.
That's a really good question. So just for a bit of context, I I'm a career coach, so I coach people go through career changes
Yeah.
within Australia, and I particularly focus on migrants because I've been through that journey. I understand what it's like to receive thousands of rejections because you don't have a visa or because you don't have relevant local work experience, right? And I take a little more of a philosophical or spiritual approach to coaching, where I see it as a holistic transformation in your inner reality before that's mirrored in your external reality. So I work a lot on the mindset level rather than just in terms of the result externally. Um, Adopting that framework allows me to keep coming back to a first principles approach. And my first principles are very simple. The three of them, it's nourish yourself in whatever way makes sense to you. The second is you earn confidence by taking consistent action towards your goals. And the third is you play from a position of strength. And the last one's interesting because as migrants, it's easy to feel like a victim. It's easy to feel like the system is rigged against you. It's easy to feel like nothing's working out in your favor. But the way around it is to play from a position of strength. So that was what helped me, and that's what I try to help my coaches do. When I come across a situation where my client is facing a problem that I can't solve, my approach, rather than trying to solve the problem for them, is to kind of um, be that container where they can come to the realization that they are not defined by their problem. So they're not identifying with it anymore. And that allows them to create a bit of space between them and the problem and then look at it from a fresh perspective. And here's an example. So I have a client from Thailand, incredible, right? She's got a INSEAD MBA, she's a CFA charter holder, but she hadn't been able to crack a single interview here in Australia. And one of her biggest pain points was that her English speaking ability wasn't the best. Personally, I thought she was fine, but she didn't think so. And I guess that came back to like tagging herself as a English as a second language speaker or something along those lines. And one day in one of her sessions, she had this breakthrough realization where she just said, "You know what, Sudarshan, I don't think I'm going to identify with that anymore. Maybe English isn't my second language. Maybe I just learned that after I learned Thai. I just learned it at a different time,
Yeah.
you know?" And that just made her feel a lot more confident about herself speaking in English when she was approaching interviews. And now she's cleared 2, 3 rounds in different companies. She's doing really well. So I see my role as a coach as being more of that person who can hold the space, be with the person as they're going through that challenge, and yeah, just kind of hold that space, so that they can come to and ask them the right questions, which can help them look at things from a different perspective or get an insight that will help them solve it on their own or navigate around it.
And just a follow-up question on that. So a lot of the times, and I think you did touch upon this, a lot of the times, the even though you're doing career coaching, it is personal, right? You're talking about the person, and you're trying to identify the strength, the weaknesses, the mindset of the person. And it's oftentimes connected to the events outside the person's career. It's connected to the way they're brought up, like what the values they have. So I mean, it's just I mean, I don't know if I have a question, but I just find that career coaching is so interesting because there's such a strong intersection between where the person is in their lives from a career standpoint, and everything that's happened in that person's life, not in a career and a personal standpoint. So I think that career coaching is actually, when I think about it now, it sounds like it's probably more complex, because at least in life coaching, you're dealing with the person's life in from the standpoint of looking at the person's life, but here it's kind of intermingled, right? It's like a big rubber band, or a bunch of rubber bands tied together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. I guess it's where it's the meeting of your entire persona, your identity, your values, your belief systems, your experiences, everything that's shaped you, coming face to face with the world, and you want a result out of it. And that's where I come in, right? So I
Yeah.
guess the critical part, which I kind of hone in on, is confidence, because that's kind of that link between those two. If I can help a person develop a greater feeling of confidence in themselves, then they're going to be more able to approach what they want, and get it.
Yeah.
Because interviews are a confidence game. Sending out applications, reaching out to people, asking them to refer you, all of that is a confidence game. So I kind of filter it down to confidence. And then
That's
I really dive in and help people build their sense of confidence.
So you've been in Australia for what, for 7 years now? 2016 is when you moved, right?
Yeah.
And so you've kind of, it's the better part of a decade at this point. And now that you've kind of ingrained yourself in the country's culture, while also having lived in India for the last 20 odd years or so, how do you find that balance between those two worlds? Like, how are you trying to incorporate the values that you grew up with, plus the ones that you've learned, or rather you've picked up in the last decade or so? How do you maintain that fine balance?
That's such a good question. Yeah, I guess the process of moving itself makes you reevaluate your values,
Yeah.
um, and identify which of them resonate with you, whereas which of them have been conditioned into you. So that was a process I went through, and I guess I came down to like three values that I really resonate with, regardless of where I am: integrity, diligence, and kindness. I feel like if I can stick to these three and make my actions aligned with that, that's going to keep me true to myself. But I guess your question is slightly broader. It's how do I balance life and culture? My family is still in India. How do I balance that with my life here? And it's a question that you struggle with. I struggle with at times, because a lot of the people that I love are in India. So I do try to go back as often as I can and be there for the key moments wherever possible. But I also feel like my career, my sense of personal purpose is tied to being here. So I try to strike a balance between the two by, yeah, just making sure I stay connected with the people that I love back at home, um, and while exploring my pursuits here. Um, that's probably the best answer I can give you right now, Abin, because it's still something that I'm figuring out, I guess.
And I totally
and
get it. I think it's a journey for all of us.
Yeah,
and I'm sure having a partner also with similar, I think she has similar roots to you, right? I think that would really help
yeah,
as well, the complementarity of the
definitely.
whole thing.
Yeah, definitely. But you know what? The interesting bit is, I came here to Australia. I adopted some of the cultural nuances of ways of life here. And then Brinda comes here from Bangalore about 6 to 8 months ago, and she's bringing with her a very strong Indian cultural upbringing. The simplest example is wearing shoes inside the house. Here in Melbourne or in Sydney, it gets pretty cold, so we're quite used to wearing your shoes inside the house. Whereas for Brinda, it's an abomination. So she doesn't let me do that.
Oh
So
no,
I've had to like change my
yeah,
culture or my value back to that.
so I lived in a house with roommates, and I much like your wife, I detest wearing shoes inside the house, and I changed the entire house. Luckily for me, one of my roommates is Bangalorean, and so he was fine.
Right.
So that was really that was great. But we switched the entire culture of wearing shoes in the house to like wearing house slippers or like
Yeah,
housewear,
yeah, that's
and
what I
that
do.
really helped. Yeah, so it really helped. But even at times, like people would come and put their shoes on the coffee table to drive me nuts, and I had to say I had to tell them like, guys, come on, like you can
Yeah.
wear your house footwear, it's fine. So I totally get your wife's perspective.
Yeah, I get it too. I
Good.
mean, if I just moved here for the first year, I still had probably took off my shoes outside, and then you gradually changed that. So yeah, one of those interesting curiosities.
My wife's from Bangalore as well. I think it's a Bang. I don't know if it's a Bangalore thing or what it is, but I feel like when we come to a different country, because there's so much dissimilarity, right, with everybody here, we probably end up finding a partner who has such
You're
similar
right.
values that and Bangalore, the
Yeah.
vibe, the vibe, the values, everything is it's unique, right? So you find that person, you're like, oh, that person is so similar to me, and it just in a country where you have that difficulty finding that, it's like you're just like, oh, this is everything.
Yeah, man, it's home. It's a little piece of home far away
Yeah,
from home.
yeah.
It
Yeah.
further accentuates the idea that Bangaloreans are quite picky with when it comes to their mannerisms, and you realize that only when you leave, and then you interact with people from the other parts of the country where you're from, and you're like, oh, okay. and, I mean, this is not something I agree with. This isn't something I agree with. So you look for comfort in places that you're familiar with.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. All right, one final question. So Sudarshan, are you currently accepting clients for your business coaching? And what would be your business elevator pitch, and how can people reach you?
Yeah, look, I'm quite selective about the clients I work with. I like working with people who are motivated, who are high performers, who are really keen to make that next transition and are willing to put in the work to do that. I guess I don't really have a pitch, but I really try to look at understanding the needs of that person. So if there's someone who is really struggling with finding their role here, and they know they're capable of so much more, they have more potential inside them, more ability to contribute and add value and make a meaningful impact, um, and see that valued for themselves personally as well. And they need a little bit of help with any aspect of integrating with the culture here, like approaching interviews confidently, or even building up the confidence to reach out to people and get referrals, or even negotiate a raise or something along those lines. I would love to help. I see my role as being kind of a catalyst in that journey that person is going through, to help them avoid the pitfalls that I probably fell into a few times, and accelerate their journey towards their destination that they want to go to. So yeah, I'd love to work with people who are driven, hungry for more, and really passionate.
Awesome. Wow.
Yeah,
So we really want to thank you once again for being on here with us. It was such a great episode, amazing interaction. um listening to you speak for the whole of the last close to an hour, it made me realize just how much in common you and I personally have. We do, we're both in finance, have finance degrees, have a foot in coaching, looking for something more. It's amazing. It's refreshing to to hear somebody who I could connect with on a personal level on such a broad way. So it was truly enriching for me. Thank you so much for being part of this journey with us.
I loved it. I loved reconnecting with you guys, and I honestly say I got to say I really admire what you're doing. Um, you're exploring telling stories, and stories are such a powerful way of bringing people together and bringing a community together and touching the lives of people in some ways that they won't probably fathom until much later. Like, I remember the podcasts I listened to, and so a few of those things just stay with you and they come back at the right moment. And it could be like a little seed that's planted, which sprouts and grows into something beautiful. So I love what you guys are doing, and honestly, I've loved connecting with you both again. And I'm sure we'll stay in touch. So thank you again for having me. It's been a pleasure.
It's
Thank
been a
you.
great conversation. So we've been speaking for like just close to an hour, and it has absolutely flown by. And we were recording this quite early today. and I am not traditionally a morning person, as people like to say. But this has been a really like engaging conversation that we've had over the last hour, and I'm so thankful uh, that you took the time out to come and speak to us. It's been great reconnecting with you.
Yeah, all the best to the podcast, and yeah, I hope we connect again soon.
Of course, we'll see you very soon. We'll probably have you back on as well in a couple of episodes. So um, to further,
Sounds
to
good.
continue this
Yeah.
conversation, I feel like we've kind of left it off at a point where we can further pick this back up and take this on further. So I guess that's us for this week's episode, Vivek. Shall we close it out?
Yep. Yes.
Uh,
All
so
right.
we'll
Thanks, boys.
thank you so much. We'll see you on the next one.